Dragon Age 2, mages have 3 abilities. They can teleport, they can self-shield, and they have an area of effect knockback spell. Whether the mage is human, Kunarian, Darkspawn, or any other race in the game, they all have the same abilities. If the enemy wields a weapon, they don't have any special abilities in Dragon Age 2. All melee enemies in the game are exactly the same. All ranged enemies in the game are exactly the same. Granted, there may be some differences in their defensive values. Some enemies are more or less resistant to certain spells, but offensively, there's nothing unique about any enemy in Dragon Age 2. If we ignore all bosses and we ignore ogres, then all the enemies in Dragon Age 2 are exactly the same. Whether you're fighting a human, a Kunari, a Darkspawn, an undead, they are almost indistinguishable from each other. In Dragon Age 2, every encounter in the game is wave-based. So when you encounter a group of enemies, you clear them, and then more spawn. And after you've cleared out a certain number of spawns, there may be 2 or 3 spawns, usually it's only 2. After you've cleared out the second wave, then the battle ends and you're allowed to rest. This is how the entire game plays out. Because of these 2 undeniable facts about Dragon Age 2, the entire game consists of you doing the same things over and over and over again. Anyone who says Dragon Age 2 improved upon Dragon Age Origins' combat system did not play the same game as me. Granted, Dragon Age Origins had some of the same problems as Dragon Age 2, like with spontaneous spawning of monsters that didn't exist before, as well as relatively low enemy and encounter variety. Both games suffer because most encounters are non-consensually initiated, with your party always placed in a static location within melee range of your opponents. And this even happens without the aid of a dialogue transition. In both games, you can encounter enemies that you can't attack or cast any spells on until you get within a certain range of them, or until you open a door, or until you turn a corner. These enemies are invulnerable to anything you can do until you're within a specified range given by the developers of the game. So, in both games, you cannot initiate encounters on your own terms. But in Dragon Age 2, they go out of their way to make sure every single level is A to B. I don't know how to put this any other way than to say that Dragon Age 2 is linear. Now, maybe we're going to have to explore what it means for a level to be linear, because we don't necessarily mean that levels are just straight lines. Something can be linear and it can still curve in a game. And sure, Dragon Age 2 lets you take on quests in a non-linear manner, but the levels themselves where the quests take place are just straight lines. All they had to do is tell me to go to Burger Town. I'd know exactly where I need to go. Now sure, Dragon Age Origins didn't have the greatest level design either. There were a lot of corridors that funneled you down, but it had moments where you could take different rooms to reach different rooms. I had more than one way to exit and enter a room in Dragon Age Origins some of the time. There isn't a single time in Dragon Age 2 where you get to decide which angle you get to attack enemy groups from. This item was first found in Act 2 of the game, approximately halfway through. The same necklace can be found in Dragon Age Origins, as well as this belt here. As you can see in a rather early boot found in Dragon Age Origins, +1 armor is actually fairly useful. However, in Dragon Age 2, even a middling Act 2 piece of armor can give up to 100 to 200 armor, and even endgame cloth for a mage can give up to 60 or 70 armor. So finding an item that gives only +1 armor in Dragon Age 2 seems like a gross error on the part of the item designers. And of course, I'm not nitpicking here. Of course, +1 armor items are useless, but it doesn't stop there. There's +5% spirit damage, +3% physical damage rings. There's +2 defense, +6 DPS. I mean, these attributes in the large scope of things don't really impact anything. At the end game, my main character, who was a warrior, who was in the best gear I could find without playing any DLC or buying any DLC, was 450 life. And if the end game DPS of my character as a warrior was only 97, then I mean the most that 5% increased damage is going to do is give me 5 more DPS with some spell. It's very minimal and insignificant. It's poor design. Each piece of armor has minimal impact on your character. So what's the point in even having armor or items at all? It's pointless. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is how much damage per second you're doing, or at least that's the design that BioWare went for. So the end result is that you don't really care about what you have equipped because you can't maximize or minimize certain aspects about your character. The itemization is so limited that you just pick up the weapon with the highest DPS number, and that's it. People who claim that Dragon Age 2 is a better game overall than Dragon Age Origins are clearly confused because, at the very best, Dragon Age 2 shares all the same flaws that Dragon Age Origins does. And I suspect that these people are actually the victims of BioWare's attempt to streamline the game. The most deceiving thing BioWare did was that they sped up the combat in Dragon Age 2. This is what the infamous quote was about when one of the developers claimed that they wanted awesome to happen when a player pressed a button. You'll notice that for the most part, compared to Dragon Age Origins at least, all attacks are significantly faster, significantly lighter seeming, and everything feels significantly looser. The combat certainly looks more fluid. The characters are clearly flinging their weapons around much faster than before, but that is a total deception of the actual way the game plays. In fact, it's extremely deceptive because, at its core, despite all its failings, Dragon Age 2 is still a tactical, strategical role-playing game. And nowhere on Earth is there a strategic game that is fast-paced, which is what BioWare was trying to imply to players when they sped up the game's combat animations. Compared to older games, Dragon Age Origins also sped up recovery out of combat and resurrection-related issues. For instance, in Dragon Age Origins outside of combat, you regenerate a large amount of your life and mana per second, and when you lose a companion character in combat, they instantly stand back up and are fine. The only instances is that there's an injury system in Dragon Age Origins, which if you have a character that's dying too often, it will inhibit their abilities in future fights. In Dragon Age 2, they further streamline these mechanics by making characters regenerate even faster, to the point where it takes several seconds to be full on every single life and mana pool and stamina pool. And it also removed the entire injury system. There's only one kind of injury that you can have now, and that reduces your maximum life. And furthermore, there's a maximum number of injuries you can have, which is determined by the difficulty that you're playing on. In Dragon Age Origins, there are many abilities in the game that have cooldowns as long as 2 or 3 minutes. In Dragon Age 2, they eliminated these, and for the most part, spells are fairly spammable. There are a couple that have 30-second cooldowns, but there are not many abilities that you really think about before you use, because there's no cost besides the mana or stamina cost behind each action you take. In Dragon Age Origins, there are 3 classes, 3 races, and up to 3 backstories per race and class. Because gender doesn't impact how you play Dragon Age 2, there's only one significant choice at the character generation screen: By at least a factor of 2, Dragon Age 2 also reduced the number of ways you can specialize and build your characters. There's no such thing as a bow warrior, a dual-wield warrior, a dagger mage, or a two-handed rogue, or even a one-handed and shield rogue. You're forced to build the characters in a binary way. Granted, Dragon Age Origins didn't really support these wacky build ideas either. I mean, bow warriors, even though they were officially supported by the game, are pretty terrible. And using a dagger on a mage and using two-handed weapons on a rogue would be a silly choice. There's no class abilities that really benefit from it. But still, it gave you the choice. In Dragon Age 2, you can't even equip these items because they're restricted by class. Furthermore, you can no longer specifically designate what you want your companions to wear. They have a specific armor set and they use it the entire game. The only things that are interchangeable on your companions are their accessory items or their weapons. And even in Varric's case, you can't even do that. Furthermore, Dragon Age 2 has steeply risen the cost of equipping armor in the game. If you want to equip an endgame piece of armor, say level 20 chest piece, it's going to require a minimum of 41 stamina to wear. If you don't have 41 stamina at level 18 or so, you can't equip that item. It's completely useless until you've spent several levels worth of points on your stamina attribute. The same goes for weapons. If you want to use a two-handed axe, you're going to need a minimum of 45, 46 strength. So this significantly reduces how you can allocate your character's attributes. Not only can you not make an agile warrior or a wise rogue, you can't even focus on one character main attribute. You can't have a ridiculously strong warrior because you have to evenly distribute all of your points such that you have at least a minimum of 40 in both of your class's primary stats. So you can't even decide whether you want to be a tanky character or a damage dealing character because the game has decided that you have to be both. Your companion characters can't use the item you found. If you found an amazing piece of cloth robes, too bad. Nobody can use it if you're not playing a mage. The same goes for an amazing dagger if you're not using a rogue in your team, or if your rogue is using a bow. It's made most of the items you find, which is, at least for me, some of the most interesting parts of a role-playing game is managing and finding items. It's made that part of the game defunct. Dragon Age Origins has some pretty obfuscated role-playing game mechanics. There are certain stats such as defense, rapid aim, and spell power, which, you're never explained in the game what these things really do, how they affect your attacks or your skills. And even on the skill tooltips themselves, they never say how much damage they do or anything like that. So you have no idea how a piece of equipment is influencing your character. And this fact was made even worse in Dragon Age 2. I am going to attempt now to explain to you what each attribute does in Dragon Age 2. Strength increases the damage and attack of warriors. Dexterity increases the damage and attack of rogues. Magic increases the damage and attack of mages. Strength also increases the fortitude for all classes. Dexterity increases the critical strike chance for all classes, and magic increases the magic resistance of all classes. Cunning increases a character's defense stat and increases their critical damage stat, and for rogues it allows them to disarm or unlock things very based on the level of their cunning. Willpower determines a character's mana or stamina level, and constitution determines a character's maximum life. Now, that's very confusing, all those stats there. Each stat tends to do at least 3 things. And, of course, for a given class, it may only do one thing, but the one thing that it does is highly obfuscated, like, what is fortitude? What is defense? What is magic resistance? What are these values? They aren't ever explained in the game. They aren't ever told to you what these things actually do. You have to go onto the internet, and you have to go onto the Dragon Age Wikipedia page, and you have to say, oh, fortitude is added onto my maximum health, and if an attack exceeds that value, then I get knocked down. So if I have no fortitude, then I have a higher chance of being knocked down. And critical chance should be obvious, but magic resistance is a little less obvious. additive, multiplicative. It's never really explained. Defense is related to attack. Now that's what's confusing is you might think that damage is your attack, but attack is actually basically your chance to hit, which is based upon the opponent's defense level. And that's never explained. I'm not going to even attempt to explain that. But if you have a high attack, you have a high chance to hit for full damage. If you have a high defense, you have a high chance to avoid full damage. In terms of other stats that don't really make any sense is some items have increased regeneration rate on them, but it doesn't say whether you regenerate every 5 seconds or every 1 second or every half second, so you have no idea what those values even mean. You have no idea what flat resistance does. What does 500 nature resistance do? I have no idea. I've played Dragon Age 2 2 times now. I can't tell you what it does. All I know is that increasing it makes you more resistant to the damage. What's your weapon's attack speed? It's never told you. You have to do in your head, oh, if it does 38 damage and it has on the item 68 damage per second, then it must attack almost 2 times. And how are such values meaningful anyway? Why are we given damage per second on an item? Isn't an item's damage per second completely determined upon the opponent's defense stats? And there are other mechanics. I still don't know how armor influences the damage you take in Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Origins. And there's probably other mechanics I don't understand at all. The point of the matter is that none of these mechanics are conveyed to the player. They might be on the internet, they probably are, and it probably would be trivial for me to just look them up right now and tell you exactly how they work. But that's not the point. The game should be obvious to the player. I shouldn't have to read your giant manual. This isn't a pen and paper game, this is a video game. And BioWare, for all its streamlining, doesn't seem to even understand what it needs to streamline. It should have streamlined all these statistics, because if I find an item that says plus 3 strength, plus 4 fortitude, plus 2 health, is that better than plus 1 constitution, plus 1 strength, plus 3 attack? I don't know. It's really confusing. You should convey what the stats do to your character in a very simple way. And Dragon Age 2 compounds the problems that Dragon Age Origins had. In Dragon Age Origins, there's 4 major ways to specialize your character. For instance, a warrior could specialize in archery, he could specialize in two-handed weapons, he could specialize in shields, he could specialize in dual wielding. In Dragon Age 2, however, a warrior has 6 trees he can specialize in, unless he's the protagonist, but we'll talk about that in a minute. If he's just a normal companion character who's a warrior, you only get 6 ways to specialize that character. And that might seem like a larger number than 4, but you have to realize that inside each of these specialization trees in Dragon Age Origins, there's actually 3 ways to specialize. So you actually have 12 ways to specialize in Dragon Age Origins. And in Dragon Age 2, you have 6 ways to specialize. So they effectively reduce specialization of your characters by half. Now, in Dragon Age 2, your protagonist gets 3 extra specializations, such as the Reaver or the Berserker. However, in Dragon Age Origins, you had 4. And in Awakenings, you had, I think, 6. And some even had more. I don't know. I didn't really delve too much into that. But the point of the matter is that Dragon Age 2 reduced the number of ways you can specialize, as well as the ways that you can generate your character. So overall, Dragon Age 2 is less complex than Dragon Age Origins. And we're going to talk about complexity in a minute. Oh, and I know there are going to be some people who rush to the defense of that claim, but I do want to qualify that statement to clear it up. In Dragon Age 2, you can further specialize in a passive skill tree by picking some of the very small passive changes to your skills, such as there are small passives that increase the flat damage of a skill or reduce the cooldown of a skill. However, I don't really consider these increasing the complexity of your character. I mean, in some ways it's further specializing your character, but it's not doing it in any significantly impactful way. And furthermore, it's even, when you compare the two, Dragon Age Origins is front up. It says, if you want the skill at the end of this specialization, you have to spend 3 points to get there. However, in Dragon Age 2, it's a little misleading because it doesn't even tell you... I mean, it tells you you're going to need level 8 and you're going to need to spend 5 points in this tree to get the last skill in this tree. It might say something like that. However, at that time when you make the decision to specialize in a certain tree, you're not really calculating how many points you're going to have to spend to get that ability that might make it worth all this trouble to invest in this specialization tree. The end result is that it's basically more linear than Dragon Age Origins because it's making you waste more points specializing in a specialization which doesn't really even specialize you in the end. You these glorified passive skills you have to waste points in order to get an active skill you want to use. And to hopefully illustrate my point, I've reconstructed one of the trees in Dragon Age 2 to show how linear it actually is. And to the left of it, you'll see the original tree, which I believe BioWare designed that way just to give you the illusion that it's not linear. So, I need to talk about the gestalt of all this, because this is all leading to somewhere, and the core reason for why Dragon Age 2 fails as a game is that you have these mechanical systems that are determining your class and how you play your class and how you control your party. And then there are these mechanics and these design flaws in the level design which force you into situations that happen all the time. And so the result is that you really don't know what you're doing when you're playing the game, but it's okay because the game is funneling you down a linear path from A to B, and it's giving you the same encounters over and over again. So you never really have to adapt to the game's systems. You never have to do more than chug potions and make sure you have a healer in your party. As long as you do those two things, you're going to be fine. There isn't any tactical or strategical things or any mathematical things you even have to do. You don't have to decide between two items you find on the ground. Either one is going to do fine. If it just recently dropped, it probably has the right defensive values to keep you alive. Just as long as you're not using something that gives you +1 armor, you're going to be fine. So the game is easy. But it's easy in a pointless, trivial way. Like, the game solved itself. You didn't have to do anything. You won already. Now, let's say that somehow, even though it's been happening all game, you forgot that enemies were going to show up behind you and kill your mage, who was going to kill everyone, because that's usually how the game works. You use area of effect attacks to kill the enemies around you, and if you don't have those area of effect attacks, you lose. Let's say that you lose your mage. Well, you always have a backup strategy, and that's just to kite the enemies around, because there's no artificial intelligence in any of the enemies that you fight, and a lot of your tactics can just be kiting enemies. And that's going to work fine. And if those things don't work and you die, it's fine. It's not a big deal. You just reload the save that you just had. It's trivial. It's silly. It's stupid. Even if the game were tactical, there are so many other bad systems I haven't talked about. For instance, because BioWare decided that Dragon Age 2 wasn't going to be an isometric CRPG, they removed the ability to zoom out all the way. So if you have a radial area of effect attack, you can't use it because you're always looking dead on at your enemies. The only way you can get a proper angle is if you're on a stairwell or as if you're standing right in the middle of them. Do you remember when you played Baldur's Gate 2 and you encountered a whole bunch of Ithalids who were going to eat the brains of your entire party? Well, you know what happens, right? You grow them, you weren't expecting them. That's fine, you just close the door. And the Ithalids are so stupid they don't open the door, but you don't mind that. It's a video game, right? You trapped them in the room, you disengaged the encounter because you realized you couldn't handle them. Well, unfortunately in Dragon Age 2, you're not allowed to disengage enemies. They will follow you to the end of the level and chase you at hyper Mach speeds. Even if you sneak by and stealth by an entire enemy group, the moment you unstealth, they're going to locate you and chase you all across the map. This is what happened in Dragon Age Origins even. And BioWare does everything in its power to make sure that in Dragon Age Origins or in Dragon Age 2, where if you encounter something you weren't expecting and maybe you barely scrape together and you realize you can't finish off these enemies and you decide you want to disengage and start the fight over again later after you've, reevaluated how to fight these guys, you you can't. Because even if you could somehow break line of sight with these guys and lose them, you're locked in combat until your entire party has resurrected. And the only way they're going to resurrect is if there's no enemies around and you stand next to your corpse of a party member. So the end result pretty much is that BioWare does everything it can to make sure that you reload your save every time something happens that you weren't prepared for exactly. So it's polarizing design. You either steamroll everything or you die and you start over from the last time you saved, and it just encourages save scumming. It's just really bad design. A game should be, especially a strategy game, there should be surprises. And if you encounter something you weren't expecting, you should be allowed to, if you're skilled enough, to run away and to disengage these enemies and reformulate your plan, regroup, rethink how to take it on. Even if you're down a party guy and you can't resurrect him right away, you leave him there with the guys you were fighting and you start over. The game is designed so that you're supposed to have meta knowledge. You reload the save, you know where they're coming from, and even if you didn't reload a save recently, you know where they're coming from because the entire game is monotonous. Every enemy comes from every possible orifice in the room, and you know that, and you know to expect that after 10 minutes into the game. So, the only time in Dragon Age 2 where you're really going to wipe is when you're asleep. And that's going to happen eventually. You're going to get bored and tired, and not going to be thinking about what's happening. And then you're going to wipe, and then you're going to have to reload your save. And that's when you realize that Dragon Age 2 is a bad game. There's no tactics or strategy in Dragon Age 2, and that is why the game fails. And that is why I think a lot of people are having trouble, or have had trouble, understanding why this game doesn't work. And it's a core failure of understanding of why role-playing games work or don't work. And that if you're going to make an action RPG, which is what Dragon Age 2 wants to be, you have to get rid of parties. You have to get rid of party-based combat. You have to get rid of cooldowns entirely. And you have to make the potion mechanic your healer mechanic. Because otherwise, it's going to be a tactical game. Tactical games are slow-paced. They're strategic. And if you don't want to design a strategical game where you have multiple ways of entering a room, multiple strategies of creating roles, and determining how you play the game, if there aren't multiple ways to play the game, you don't have a strategical game, you don't have a tactical game, and you just have an action game. And if that's what BioWare wants to make, is an action game, that's perfectly fine. But this isn't a role-playing game. There aren't roles to play mechanically. And even if there were, there wouldn't be a reason to play them because there aren't any ways to realize your role. Every level is you opening a door, enemies spawn out of nowhere and ambush you, and you just fight them in melee range. So all you really need is a melee roll, and that's it. Melee roll with area of effect, and that's why this game totally fails from a gameplay standpoint. I'd like to thank everyone for bearing with me so far on this overly drawn out, complex reasoning and explanation as to why Dragon Age 2 failed. And I think it's important that we look at this game, even though it's not that... it was agony playing this game a second time to make this video, so that I could be assured of myself that I wasn't saying anything wrong here, that everything here I've said so far is exact fact. It's undeniable that all of these mechanics and systems are wrong in Dragon Age 2. That if Dragon Age 2 is going to be, or Dragon Age as a whole as a series is going to be a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate, it needs to be tactical and it needs to be strategic. And Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Origins, to a lesser extent, but still has some of the same problems, are not tactical and strategic enough. They fail at what Baldur's Gate does correctly. And even Baldur's Gate 2, it's not that amazing. It's a good game, no doubt. No game has really surpassed it yet that's in the category of a CRPG and is tactical and strategic and has party-based combat. No game I can name has surpassed that. But it could be better. We could have better games. And we're at the turning point where first-person shooters, third-person shooters, indie games, you name it, strategy games, all of them have gone downhill. They're all soulless, empty, with not enough. They're all streamlined, and this is where we have to put our foot down. We have to say, listen, Wasteland 2 developers, listen, Obsidian, listen, Barclay 2 developers, whatever games being made right now by AAAs or indie developers, you guys need to sit down and you need to understand a couple important things about role-playing games. But before I do all that, before I implore and explain and show exactly how you make good gameplay that's tactical and strategic, I need to go over Dragon Age 2's narrative. And I think it's important because role-playing games, it's not a dichotomy, but people tend to think of it as a dichotomy. There's either the role-playing part or the gameplay part, and that these two things are, very different, and that they sometimes work together to make a game. And I've been sort of making some private conversations with a certain BioWare employee who's been working on the Dragon Age series, and from what I understand, BioWare seems to think that you either make a game and it's focused on the gameplay, or you make a game and it's focused on the story. I think that's an inane and silly division. You can work on both. Now, granted, you have finite resources. You can't devote probably equal number of resources to both, but there's no reason that you can't have a good game with a good story. It's silly. They're not mutually exclusive, and we need to really examine why Dragon Age 2's narrative also fails, and how a good role-playing game has good mechanics and what those mechanics are, and how a good role-playing game has a good narrative and how that narrative works.
Patrolling the area where the Dane was first spotted, though the fate of the crew is still unknown. Several dead at a beach house in Santa Monica tonight. Police suspect the slayings were carried out during a drug deal gone bad. Residents of this quiet community were shocked by the killings, though neighbors suspected the men in the house to be involved in drug distribution and had seen many strange people going inside at all hours of the night. Art criticism or vandalism? Paintings on display at Santa Monica's Gallery Noir were slashed by an intruder who evaded.
Everything in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines accomplishes the goal of convincing you as the player and the audience that the world you are acting in as a virtual agent is real and plausible. The key word there is plausible. I'm not saying that vampires are real in real life or that conspiracy theories are true, but I'm saying that all of the mechanics, all of the gameplay elements, all of the story elements, all of the characters, all of the settings, all of the sounds accomplish the goal of making the world seem real.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, who will be? Eeny, meeny, miny, moe, who will be?
Whether it's Vampire the Masquerade's moody soundtrack or the cacophony of car alarms and receptionists picking up phones and people coughing and all of those things are effectively submerging you into the world. But even more obvious is the visual imagery in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, with tall towers that stretch up to the dark night sky, to gargoyles that stand ever present as we walk around a corner. Every level in Vampire the Masquerade is oozing with gothic imagery, and it's effectively creating an atmosphere and a world that's plausible. Immersion happens when you believe a world could be real, it could exist, and this concept was mostly pioneered by Tolkien when he did Lord of the Rings, and I don't think I need to go into that. There's plenty of people who have thoroughly explained how you can convince a reader that the world that they're looking at is real, but it comes down to a hypothetical question or so, and you narrowly define how your world differs from the world that we supposedly live in. And the problem with Dragon Age 2 is that it lacks the fidelity visually and auditorially, as well as in many other things that make it not plausible. And it becomes very apparent when you replay the tutorial levels several times.
It's a fun time!
Well, you just ring the front desk and ask for Officer Chunk. That's me, in case you were wondering.
The main problem with Dragon Age 2's beginning is that it doesn't set us in the world in an effective way. What it does is it places us in this mysterious black void where two people are talking to each other. One is a woman from France, and the other is a short man who's named Varric. And apparently he's a dwarf, and he's telling her the story that she demands that he tell her. And this story is the game that we're experiencing. And we're treated to a short cartoon before this scene, and it serves almost no purpose in explaining what happened. I can recall my feelings of total confusion and disorientation, total lack of understanding of what has transpired and what timeline we're even. But apparently this is after the Battle of Ostagar, and apparently Lothering was destroyed already, and we hail from this place that I vaguely recall from Dragon Age Origins, and we're escaping the Darkspawn. Now, I don't know where we're at this point. We're in a black, tarry mess. It looks like it's basalt. Like, are we on a volcano? All around us is this blasted abyss, and there's a bridge in the distance. I don't recognize the bridge. I do remember vaguely in Dragon Age Origins walking across a very long bridge for a very, very short time. We scarcely even talked about it or looked at it. So iconically, it doesn't mean anything to me. And thinking about this from a completely new player's perspective, they must be completely, and they have no idea where they're at. And it's only solidified when we think about the fact that 5 minutes ago, we had a dwarf and a woman in a black void talking about something seemingly different from what's going on in this scene. The first question that should enter your mind is, how did we transition from the narrator to this scene? Because if Varric is telling this woman a story, then he's narrating this, right? We're playing the narration he's telling her. But we haven't met Varric yet, so Varric can't have any idea what this place looks like, and he probably has no idea what anyone is saying in the situation. I mean, if Hawke is a real character in a real story in a real world, then he experienced these things, but Varric didn't. And while we can say, sure, Hawke may have told Varric exactly what happened the day he had to leave Lothering, that doesn't change the fact that he's basically making this all up in his head. So this is where the problem is. There's a giant disconnect between the narrative and the actual world. Because, in effect, we are not playing a role-playing game in a fantasy world. We're playing a role-playing game inside Varric's mind.
Bullshit. That's not what really happened.
Does that not match the story you've heard, Seeker?
I'm not interested in stories. I came to hear the truth.
What makes you think I know the truth?
Don't lie to me. You knew him even before he became the champion.
Even if...
Still at Hawke's side.
Dabbling. I thought you'd have noticed by now.
I lie a lot.
I've spent my whole life in Kirkwall. I've spent my whole life in Kirkwall.
And you might be tempted to say, well, perhaps BioWare didn't intend this, and that they're just using Varric as a clever segue to start the story. But that's incorrect, because BioWare goes out of their way to remind us twice. First in the beginning of the game, and the second time towards the middle of the game, that Varric is telling us story to this woman. And he so much does as make up things. In the first scene of the game, your sister has enlarged breasts for some mysterious reason. It's supposed to be a joke, right? I mean, it's obvious to the player who's just started playing this game that Varric is making this all up. It didn't really happen. And there's another scene in the when you confront Varric's brother for the last time, where you go into the house and he shoots all these people one-hit KO style, and that woman interrupts him and says, "Hey, did that really happen? Aren't you exaggerating all this?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm pretty cool. I'm badass like that." So he's exaggerating in points, and we're being told he's exaggerating there. But in other places, we're never informed whether something is an exaggeration or if it's actually happened in the story. And this is only further compounded if you play Dragon Age Origins, because in Dragon Age Origins, Leliana, an important companion in the game, tells you all about bards. And bards can be lying, manipulating trickster assassins. And Varric seems to identify with the idea of being a bard. So if he's telling this woman a story, how do we know any of it's true? We have an unreliable narrator here, and the unreliable narrator is an effective device in literature. And I'm sure that some of the people at BioWare who have degrees in writing are familiar with that device. But when you use it in a Tolkien-esque way to fabricate a fantasy world and make it seem real, you're only undermining yourself when you can't trust the narrator. There shouldn't be a narrator in a fantasy role-playing game. I mean, I'm not going to say that you can't do it right, but here it's not executed at all, because if you examine the entire tutorial level, it doesn't make any sense. Varric couldn't have possibly been here, and there's too many logical inconsistencies that point to the fact he's making this all up off the top of his head. Never mind that the landscape is almost dreamlike in its strange black blurriness. I mean, it's not my computer. I have these textures on pretty good resolution and quality. I know Dragon Age 2 isn't a visual masterpiece, but it looks like the ground is smeared black. And if you examine the terrain very closely, you'll see that it just looked like someone dragged the bump raise terrain tool across this flat plane. It's like they had an intern do this level. Now, I don't want to insult BioWare's artistic capabilities here, but if it's not some intern doing this, then it was clearly intended to be dreamlike, because I'm not aware of any volcanic activity in Ferelden. We were never, told that there was a giant volcano next to this tall bridge, and it doesn't seem like we're any recognizable place. I don't see Lothering in the distance. I don't even see anything that reminds me of the previous game. So as far as I know, we're in a dreamscape. And if you go even further, you say, Flemeth looks like, she looks great. Did she lose 20 years in between the two games? Wait, this is before she was killed? Or maybe this is when we took Morrigan away, so she had time to just fly over here? I don't know. She looks different, okay? And that's a problem, because we now have terrain that isn't familiar, and we have a character who's seemingly familiar, but isn't familiar. So is this Varric's imagination of this woman he could have met at least in the game? He's imagining her like this? I don't really understand. And what does she have to do with the story again? Isn't this a ham-fisted tie-in? And there's this bit about Flemeth helping us go to Kirkwall, and this is where we really start to lose it, because there's a loss not only of place but of time. So we've lost all temporal sense of where we are, because Flemeth swoops down and she lands on the ground and she says, "I need you to take this thing of mine to this place. Would you please help me?" And you don't really have a choice in it. You have a yes or no, and if you keep saying no, you eventually say yes. But the main focus is that how did we wind up on this boat? Did she fly us to the nearest dock? Wouldn't the nearest dock be overrun by darkspawn? Why didn't we walk to the nearest dock? I don't really understand how we got on this ship and why she couldn't just have flown us to Kirkwall or any number of things that could have happened in between. And we're just supposed to accept that we're on this boat. And it's really confusing because a lot of games have used boats to very good effect. Like Baldur's Gate 2 had you using boats. You had to secure a boat ride somewhere. That's a good game mechanic. Not only is that a good game mechanic, it's an interesting setting. They could have started Dragon Age 2 on a boat, but I don't need to talk about it. I mean, we could have met all of our companion characters on this boat, and they could have come from all walks of life, and it could have been a really interesting role-playing setting. But instead, we're on a boat, and we're at Kirkwall. And pretty much this entire Black Ashen tutorial level is completely devoid of any emotion, because not only do we not know the sense of time and place, we don't know who any of our characters are. Because we start out with this family of these 4 people we don't really know anything about, and then we meet a woman and her husband, and we fight some darkspawn, and then her husband dies. Or excuse me, before that, one of our siblings dies, and it's determined on what class we picked. And at that point, our character, no matter what kind of alignment we are, if we pick red options or green options or blue options, we don't seem to shed any emotion over our brother or sister dying. And not only is that's psychopathic. How am I supposed to reconcile that my character, no matter what I do, has no emotion, apparently, for the fact that my mother is crying and that my sibling is dead? How is my character standing there stoically talking to this crazy mage lady that came out of nowhere and turned into a woman from a dragon? It's completely nonsensical and not human in any way. And I'm not saying that fantasy role-playing games need to be the epitome of good drama and writing, but when you're role-playing is supposed to be about role-playing. I'm playing the role of a human, presumably, and normal humans don't act like that. And it just points more evidence into the idea that Varric is making this all up, because he couldn't possibly know the emotions that the mother is going through, or that my character is going through in this situation. And so I can understand why the emotion here is really confused. But even further, Aveline's husband is dead, and I choose to kill him just to see what'll happen. And it's just so weird. I kill her husband, and she doesn't resent me at all for the rest of the game. In fact, she wants to stalk me for the rest of the game. It's that part I'll get into later, but everything in this tutorial section is completely devoid of any useful initial setup. It's just confusing. It's just conflicted. It's a fantasy, and it doesn't attempt at all to establish that the world that we're in is plausible. Dragon Age 2 never establishes Kirkwall as a believable setting. In fact, every moment that you spend in the game's world, you become more and more convinced that it's not real. In the next 5 minutes after you're off the boat, there's this seemingly confusing 3D wait for your uncle to show up, and then you choose a mercenary to help, and then there's a year-long time skip, and then suddenly everybody knows your name. And they're always glad you came, and our troubles are all the same because apparently, I mean, it's like, imagine you just woke up one day in a strange room that wasn't yours, and there was a strange woman there that said, "Hi, honey," and suddenly you're living somebody else's life. Well, that's what Dragon Age 2 feels like. There's a year-long time skip. Everyone seems to know your name. Everyone seems to say, "Hey, you want the usual? Come, sit down, have a beer with me. Don't you remember what we talked about yesterday?" "No, I don't remember. We didn't have a conversation. Are you crazy?" That's what it feels like. It's not placing me. It's not immersing me in the world. It's making me reject the world very wholeheartedly. And Dragon Age 2 might possibly be the worst executed opening sequence in any video game that's a role-playing game that I can think of. It completely disconnects you from the experience, and it's hard to role-play a character who has no established backstory, who has no established anything, and who's spirited away into this strange world that probably isn't even real. golden eagle statues and giant slaves and slave masters and pearly white tall buildings are kind of interesting setting, but Dragon Age 2 doesn't have any imagery that actually means anything. I mean, the setting of Kirkwall being a city built by slaves is interesting, but it's only mentioned in offhand by a handful of NPCs, like in the beginning of the game, that it was built by slaves, or they mention slaves offhandedly like once. And we're told about slavers that exist in the city, but we never really meet their organization or the slaves they even keep, or even the slave trade or any of that sort of thing. How people view that in the modern context, or how people feel about the city being built by slaves, or what kind of, where are the ancestors, the descendants of these slaves? Where are they? Are they in the slums? Are they ruling the city? We have no real context. And Dragon Age 2 doesn't have a heart, I guess I would say. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, for instance, does. It's obvious. I don't really think I need to go into what the heart of that game is. It should be maybe not immediately obvious, but playing through it, it should give you an idea of what its essence is. And, you learn about themes and thematicism in probably your high school literature class, and I'm not an English teacher. I'm not going to teach you about symbolism and all that, and I'm not going to try and convince you that anything about that is meaningful or useful. But in a role-playing game, when you're trying to make someone believe that the world is real, symbols and language and imagery and sounds and audio cues and themes and conflicts are so integral and important, because if you don't have those things, then it just seems like a flat facsimile. I could go on, but I've made this video long enough. Dragon Age 2 doesn't have this integral, quintessential thing that all good role-playing games have. I mean, even Planescape Torment, you could name, Baldur's Gate 2 has it, Fallout has it, you name it, it has it. It's got heart.
To the ground.
Potent stuff. Haven't seen anyone zoned out like that since Nar Shaddaa.
I think I know you, but I don't remember anything. I don't know what you want. Everything hurts. Everything hurts.
I want to tell you a story, BioWare. It's a story you might be familiar with. It's the story of Meryl. Okay, Meryl has a pride demon, or maybe it's a greed demon. I don't know which one. It's one of those demons inside of her. And she is convinced that what she's doing is right, and that she wants to restore the pride of her people, and that by fixing a mirror, she's going to accomplish that, and that the only way to fix the mirror is to use demonic power. And even when it comes to the point where she's got to climb up a mountain against her keeper's orders to use a demon to fix a mirror, she's willing to go that far. And she's convinced that going that far is the right thing to do. Well, listen, I'm the player character, and I know you're confused. I know you're confused because it doesn't even make any sense. Because if you play Dragon Age 2 and you befriend Meryl, you side with her on everything. You say, yes, Meryl, it's a good plan. Use blood magic. Yes, Meryl, it's a good plan. Fix the mirror. Yes, Meryl, it's a good plan. It's a very, very good plan. And this is very, very clearly the sign of a psychopath, because this is not friendship. This is not friendship. When someone is hurting themselves and hurting others, you tell them, even if it ruins your friendship, that they're hurting themselves and that they should change their ways because it will make them happier in the end. So guess what? Why is it rivalry to side against Meryl? If I tell Meryl she's wrong, if I tell Meryl that, listen, using blood magic to fix your problems is a bad idea, every single person that I've known playing your 2 games so far who's used blood magic has turned into a maniac bent on destroying everything for no apparent reason, even at the cost of their own self-survival instincts. Even when I know this and I'm telling you this and you're still not believing me, and I'm still horribly,
horribly confused right now, BioWare. I mean, Meryl, why you're doing this. And you're still doing it. And the game is still telling me this is a rivalry option. This is not rivalry. I am your friend, BioWare. Meryl, I'm telling you what you're doing is wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that give up blood magic. Give up your pride. And do what's right. I know, that's deep, right? But seriously, Meryl, when you want to help Meryl, you gotta be her rival. Because if you side with her on everything, the Keeper dies, her clan dies. She's not even upset at the end. It's really baffling. She says some horrible thing like, oh, this is so horrible, after you kill her entire clan. But after that, she's just like a doll. She's like, hi there. And that's her character. She doesn't kill herself. She doesn't turn into a wreck. Nothing really happens at the resolution of her arc, which is so weird. And she should be upset. All the decisions that she made, the entire game were wrong, and they resulted in the death of her keeper and the death of her entire clan. The things that she was probably aiming to protect, she wanted to protect her clan. She wanted to preserve the ways of her clan. It wouldn't make sense for them to all die and for her to not care. So in the rivalry options, when you tell her she's wrong this whole time, and then the demon thing happens and her clan dies and the keeper dies, she's like, oh my god, player character, you're amazingly smart. You were right this whole time. I'm so sorry, you were right. And she changes. She says she'll never use blood magic again. And this is a perfect character arc. That's how it should work. That's how it should have worked in the game, but apparently it's the rival option. Listen, BioWare, this is deep. You're unconsciously writing about your own problems. Use Meryl as an example. Just admit that you're wrong. That we can see what's right. We who stand in the outside your office doors, we see Call of Duty people trying to copy Call of Duty World of Warcraft, and they don't go anywhere. We were telling you this. And okay, the clan is almost dead. We can still salvage it, so please listen to me.
The BBC would like to apologize for the following announcement.
This is an important interlude. I'm sorry. We have to talk about this. And it starts with Kotaku. Kotaku and sites like it are scum. They are scumbags. Because they, at the best times, are journalists. And on the worst times, are bloggers. And when something hits the internet that's going to give them hits, which is going to give them money, they're right all over it. So when Jennifer Hepler is attacked on Twitter for stating her opinion on something or other, it's suddenly misogyny. No. This is obfuscating the truth. This is hiding the truth. This isn't journalism. This is an attempt at making money. Okay? Jennifer Hepler is not the problem with Dragon Age 2. She has nothing really to do with Dragon Age 2. She wrote some things, and she said some controversial things in a promo video BioWare released, but she doesn't really pertain directly to the problems with Dragon Age 2. And anyone who taunted her on Twitter was more or less a troll. And it doesn't mean that people who dislike Dragon Age 2 are a bunch of trolls. It doesn't. And that's what Kotaku and these other websites did. They associated us with trolls. We are not trolls. We're very civilized human beings and consumers who have feelings too, and we are pretty logical, okay? And when Jennifer Hepler says she doesn't like to play video games, she likes to be told a story, and that's exactly what happens in Dragon Age 2. It's natural to understand that some people would get upset, and they'd say, Jennifer Hepler is cancer, and the reason why BioWare is being bad right now. Well, that's a gross oversimplification of all the problems, but it's an emotional response, and what Kotaku and other sites should have done is maturely say, well, this is what happened. This is why the fans did that. That's why some trolls posted on her Twitter account. That's why this whole exchange happened, is because Jennifer Hepler represents something that a certain part of the consumer base is resisting, and they don't like the streamlining of their games, the downfall of their games, the lack of attention paid to them.
And instead of writing some article delving into the reasons why that these people got so upset over someone who didn't really do anything, Kotaku just makes some blanket statements about how horrible it is that Jennifer Hepler is suffering and that all these people are doing all this just because they don't like what she said. Well, it's a lot more than that. And it's a shame that no other site I can find on the internet seems to ever acknowledge this. And it's a real shame that people like me and the rest of us who complain about and demand a higher quality of service and product are labeled trolls. It's a shame no one defends us and says, hey, these people aren't fire and brimstone crazy trolls. These people have feelings too. We're not a vocal minority. That's what we're labeled as. And journalists should be helping to assist people like us. They should be, of course, being punitive on the people who are being childish. But it's not like, I mean, they had an emotional response. And sure, the reaction that everyone had was completely inappropriate and uncalled for and unnecessary and only did more damage than it did any good. But that doesn't give someone who's trying to present themselves as a journalist the very right to just ignore us and to label us and to simplify the bigger issues at hand. I mean, we're not a bunch of misogynists. I know journalists like to throw that word around, but I don't really consider myself a hater of the opposite sex, and I don't think that has anything to do with what we're talking about. But it seems that whenever this discussion comes up, it's always becomes a matter of the sexes. It has nothing to do with any of that. This is about, in fact, this even extends to journalists. You'll go to a site like Kotaku, and you'll see on the front page, we want games to be shorter. Hold on a minute. I mean, this is where this video, maybe it's the heart of this video, maybe. It could be. I mean, I don't think there's any one way to make a good game. There's plenty of ways to make a good game, but when you have people clamoring, like Jennifer Hepler, who say that they want a fast-forward button, or you have people on Kotaku who think that games should be experiences all about quick-time events and cutscenes and whatever, and artistic meaning, sure, games can have those things and be those things, but not all games should be like that. And when there's only a finite number of AAA game studios who are willing to make these expensive big budget titles, I mean, we can't ask them to all make the same game. That's what happens that's why Call of Duty is around. Is because they're all trying to make the same experience because they all want to make the same money. I mean, if things are going to be if games are going to be artistic, they should be true to themselves and they should be art. You can't make art when you're trying to copy somebody else. And you certainly can't make art when you're always worried about, how much money this game's going to cost, how much money this thing is going to make. Art is art, and Dragon Age 2 isn't art. It isn't immutable. Neither is Mass Effect 3. If these things are art, why is every single camera panning in on someone's rear end? Sure, sexuality can be art, but at some point or another, you have to say, this isn't art. And Dragon Age 2, by all means, isn't an attempt at art. And so it isn't free, even if it were art, even if it might be art, that doesn't exclude it from criticism. In fact, that invites criticism. Artists, true artists, want all kinds of criticism. They don't even want constructive criticism. If they can get an emotional response out of someone, they should be satisfied, because art is meant to oppose the systems that make us exist. I mean, capitalism or communism or whatever system you live under, we're going to work every day and you're making money. Well, art is supposed to remind you that, yes, you're making money, but you're more than the money that you make. And Apparently, that's not the case with BioWare games at the moment. So I think the deeper issue here is not, female game designers or complex games versus simple games. I think it's the clear attempt to take a piece of art and to commodify it. It's to say, well, BioWare, you spent 6 years on Dragon Age Origins. I want you to make Dragon Age 2 in 11 months, and I want you to sell the same number of copies. That's what EA told BioWare, I'm sure, or somebody at BioWare, some marketing head said, we need to do this and make more money. And you can't commodify art. I mean, there are people who commodify art and they make lots of money, but I would be tempted to say that at some level that piece of art has lost most of its meaning and value because it has become a commodity. And so that's what I think these sites should be talking about, is the commodification of video games, or more or less how they've always been a commodification and how they struggle to rise above that.
Player, what's the score? How they hang? Good evening and all that commotion. Welcome to Fat Larry's Trucker Mac, the only store for all your needs after 10 o'clock. I am the proprietor and salesman of the month several years in a row. The ladies call me, oh God, but you can call me Fat Larry with a F-A-T, cause I know I got a weight problem, I just don't give a fuck. Counterfeit? Man, I look like one of those peanut-headed rock-smoking brothers selling SHACK shirts they made at their mama's house. I'm the real deal OG man in the alley with what you need. Counterfeit? Man, why you gotta be like that? Nah, that's what I like to hear. But it's like this. I save my best stuff for select clientele. Now, that don't mean I don't appreciate your business. It's just, business.
Now, before I end this part, there's still a whole lot more I'd like to talk about. And I think where I really need to start talking is where Dragon Age 2 fails on all accounts, whether it's the role-playing aspect mechanically, or whether it's the difficulty presented by the narrative. Bear with me here, I have another long clip I'd like you to really pay attention to, and I want you to think about what's happening as it's happening.
Hey, stop right there.
I want you to pay very close attention in the next clip I'm going to show you. I want you to focus on the NPCs, not the enemies or the actors in these scenes. Just watch what the NPCs do. Now, I know none of you actually believe that in Dragon Age 2's world that people casually stroll through horrible violence happening in the streets. I can believe it's commonplace for violence to happen in Dragon Age 2's setting, but obviously people have a survival instinct, and this isn't present in Dragon Age 2 because the NPCs in Dragon Age 2 don't react to anything. They have a set path. Well, they may have a random path. I don't know how it's programmed, but they have a random or set path, and they just follow it. That's all they do. They don't react or respond to any things that you do or any actions you make on the game world. And Vampire the Masquerade obviously has enemy AI. When enemies get low on health, they run away. They're afraid. They don't want to die. And that makes sense. Now, granted, Vampire the Masquerade's combat doesn't look that great. It looks kind of stiff and jerky and a little weird, but it's exciting. And when an NPC, an innocent person, is involved and you lose humanity, which is a game system, as a result of killing someone in a city, which is obviously going to happen. An innocent is going to be caught up in some sort of gunfight. That's how it works in real life. And it's completely believable that this scenario could play out like this. Dragon Age 2 doesn't have this, and it's just jarring that the world that you're in doesn't seem real because nothing is simulated. And yes, I'm not asking for Dragon Age 3 to be like Fallout or for it to be like Dwarf Fortress. I'm just saying that Dragon Age 2 fails at both the mechanical level and at the narrative level when it doesn't take the basic steps to give NPCs basic AI. I mean, it would be almost trivial to instruct NPCs to run away when combat initiates. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about simulation in a few minutes, but I'm not asking to simulate an entire world and all of its systems, but in real life we could say that things happen as a result of multiple systems interacting, and role-playing games lend themselves, and computers lend themselves to simulating things. And if you don't simulate the world in any capacity, which Dragon Age 2 doesn't, then you have a fake world mechanically. I'm rapidly approaching the hour-and-a-half mark, and I could assuredly go on and, create even more criticism for this game, and I think there are other people who've done an okay job of pointing out what's wrong with it. Certainly Smudboy has done an acceptable job of pointing out the flaws in the narrative and the characters and some of the inconsistencies, and I don't think I need to do that. And I sort of do want to talk a little bit about what BioWare did do right with Dragon Age. And I guess what they did do right is they did a few characters right, and most notably they did the Kunari fairly well. Except maybe they didn't go far enough with them.
How to exist.
Seems to me that most of Kirkwall hates you just as much.
Since we arrived, I have seen nothing but greed and weakness. Dwarves, humans, elves, just festering. No order, no goal. You are one of the few I have met with any ability. And yet this too was random, a result of selfishness. I cannot fathom how a mire like this can be justified.
And I can appreciate that BioWare lets us ditch whatever companions we come to hate. Really, I wish I had time to talk about how much I hate Isabella and Anders.
I am a monster. Justice has been warped by my rage. I cannot contain him any longer. I will not put myself in that position again.
You're possessed. I doubt strong resolve will be enough to counter that.
You're right. I cannot change what I am. I should get out of Kirkwall. Go where I won't hurt anyone. Would you have me leave?
I want nothing more to do with you.
Understood. I hope we both live to see the circle fall.
Granted, I still ended up getting this scene in Act 3, even though Anders was supposedly gone. And of course I knew he'd show up for the final scene to commit the most completely nonsensical act he's ever made, and completely invalidate his entire character across 2 games, but that's besides the point. BioWare does an okay job of making your choices matter in the immediate sense, and Dragon Age Origins even does this better than Dragon Age 2, where it doesn't necessarily matter that you choose the werewolves or the elves at the end of the game. You still get a satisfying conclusion, and sort of you feel like your choices sort of matter, and they create sort of a immediate pleasurable result when you realize you can slaughter a bunch of elves while also being a Dalish elf yourself. And I don't really mind that Kirkwall is a bunch of reused assets. I mean, I think Dragon Age 2 being a more focused game around a more localized and realized setting is probably better than trying to do what Dragon Age Origins did, which was go everywhere and do everything, because the scope of that is fairly large, and I do like that Dragon Age 2 is focused around a city, and it reminds me a lot more of Baldur's Gate than Dragon Age Origins does.
The Maker himself sent you.
And I do appreciate that the Chantry is less thematically important in Dragon Age 2, as I didn't quite enjoy it in Dragon Age Origins. But in the same breath, I have to say that the Chantry was done very well in Dragon Age Origins. And if you go watch that clip I just played a second ago again, I think you're going to realize what I did, in that the game is really hinting at the fact that your party is divinely ordered to do something, or at least it seems like it's fate, because everything that goes on is related to the origin of the Chantry and the divinely nature of its prophetess. And, you know, you find the ashes, and you kill the Darkspawn, and that's very well effectively done, and it's all wrapped up in a nice way. Whereas, and because of all the inconsistencies and the implausibilities, and the lack of the fact that all the mages turn out to be abominations except your sister, it seems like it's very hard to find a theme that makes sense in Dragon Age 2, and everything just feels contrived. And I'd like to conclude this part of the video by saying that you're welcome to like Dragon Age 2. I can't tell you what to like and not to like. I think you can like Dragon Age 2 in the same sense one might like a B movie. Like, Red Letter Media might enjoy watching Resident Evil 5, but they only enjoy it because they can poke fun at the tropes and enjoy some of the mindless action. And it's not necessarily bad to like those things, but it is bad to like those things and to say that, you know, they're good at the same time, and that there should be more of them made over things that could be better and that you could enjoy more. And I think it's important to analyze why you like something, and it's important to have an opinion, but have an opinion that has evidence behind it. You can say that this entire video, all it is just my opinion, and that's perfectly fine. Thank you for stating the obvious. We live in a world possibly where truth is entirely perspective-based, and that there is no such thing as an absolute truth, or even a fact. We can call such things into question philosophically, but at the end of the day, the only opinions that tend to have any meaning or be useful to anybody are opinions that are qualified with something. So, lol, it's the internet. If you want to stop this video here and say, this entire video is your opinion, my opinion is also equally valid, then you're wrong. It's not equally valid because you haven't, it's only equally valid if you've spent more than 10 seconds thinking about why you like Dragon Age 2. And we need to demand a higher quality from BioWare. And in the next part of this video, which I hope you'll stick around and watch, is what could BioWare do to make Dragon Age 2 work, and what I hope they're going to do in Dragon Age 3, but I know they won't, but hopefully they could. And I'm going to explore what makes a game complex, what makes simulation work, and all the things that I alluded to in the beginning of this video. Good role-playing games are good number games, and the reason for this is very simple. Role-playing games, if we didn't have numbers enforcing things, people could just arbitrarily decide they have some power that can do something. I'm sure you've all played pretend as children, and you know this to be true, that if you let someone do something without any rules, they're going to do it eventually. So that's why good role-playing games have good statistics to enforce good role-playing behavior. And good role-playing systems in good role-playing games let you do things that you want to do. Now, they do restrict you and limit you, but that restriction and limitation is constructive. It's there to say that you can't be a superhuman. Or if you can, you're superhuman in some limited aspect. A good role-playing system is sufficiently complex so that humans can express their imagination in a complex way. They aren't arbitrarily constrained to someone else's imagination. Of course, role-playing systems also enforce a sense of logic. You can't have Jedis in a medieval setting, and that's to preserve the fidelity of the role-playing experience, although you technically probably could figure out a way to properly role-play Luke Skywalker in Dragon Age Origins, but that's besides the point. We're making a video game where we're constraining things, but we're trying to make a system that allows for as much complexity as possible. A lot of people who talk about games throw around the words complexity and simplicity, but I think that they don't really understand what those terms mean, and maybe I don't, but the best way I think to talk about these two terms is to qualify what we mean when we talk about complexity. So I'm going to throw out some numbers here. This isn't technically the best way to try and do this, but it's the only way I can do it in 15 minutes, so bear with me. Tic-tac-toe is the simplest game we're going to talk about, and it's simple because its state space complexity is 765 possible tic-tac-toe boards. And I believe tic-tac-toe is a simple game, and this is where opinion starts, but I believe it's a simple game because it has 765. And because when you play tic-tac-toe, if we think about it like a computer would play tic-tac-toe, we can think of a human who says, if I put X here, then my opponent can put O there. And if I put X there, my opponent can put O there. So inside the human brain, we are unconsciously drawing these trees of boards here. And this is how we're solving the game in our mind. And this is how computers solve the game. They consider every single possibility and they look ahead. And that's how you play tic-tac-toe, is you predict your opponent and you say, what if my opponent made the best move he could possibly do? And because tic-tac-toe has such a small number, 765, which realize you're not going to try and imagine all of those boards at once. You're only going to try and imagine like 1/10 of them. You can think of 76 things maybe. And maybe there's only going to be 1/100th of those boards in a single game of tic-tac-toe. So further, you can think of 7 boards at once, so you can think of 7 possibilities, and that's a very simple game to understand, to master. Children who are very young learn how to play this game well. The next game up is Pokemon. In Pokemon, if we think about it, there are only 9 moves at any given point, a maximum of 9 moves that someone can perform in any given moment in Pokemon, because you only have 4 moves a single Pokemon can know at once, and at any given moment you can only switch to 5 alternate Pokemon in your party. If you can't run away, if you can't use items, there's only 9 actions you can make in a single turn. So it's very easy, once your opponent knows all 5 Pokemon in the rest of your team, and knows all 4 moves of the Pokemon that's out, how they can predict exactly what you're going to do. And that's what makes Pokemon a very simple game. I could go into the combinations of how deep you have to go to think and imagine the possible moves that could happen in a Pokemon game, but I don't think I need to do that. I think we can imagine and think to ourselves that Pokemon probably is not much more complex than tic-tac-toe, because tic-tac-toe has 9 squares, and we only have 9 moves we can make in a single option. So by a factor of 9, things are increasing in complexity. It's a very simple game. Mind you, Pokemon is actually very complex when you consider there's over 600 Pokemon that could know over 10 moves each, who could all be differently EV-spec'd and IV-spec'd, but that's where Pokemon gets its complexity, is that Pokemon is both a simple and a complex game at the same time. And I think I'm going to dwell on Pokemon in a minute when because it's a turn-based role-playing game, coincidentally the same kind of game BioWare is trying to make. The next 2 games are chess and Go, and I think we can say that Go is the most complex game that anyone can play that is meaningfully complex. And I have to qualify that because we could arbitrarily make a game that's arbitrarily complex. We could say, let's play a game where we name the highest number we can think of. Well, there's infinitely many numbers you could think of, and one is going to be infinitely higher plus 1 than the guy that just thought of. So that game is arbitrarily complex. I'm talking about games that have they're a game that people want to play, and they're complex. Chess has more boards than there are particles in the universe. Go has... it's enormously more complex than chess. We don't even really know. We have an estimation only of how many possible Go boards that are legal, and it's like e to the 180. That's I can't even describe to you how large that is. That isn't on a 21 by 21 board. Go is the most complex board game that anyone plays. Even checkers has 10 to the 40 possible boards. So, I mean, when we start talking about complexity, about games, it grows so rapidly, it's hard to get your hands around it, especially if you don't have a mathematical background and you're not thinking about things like that. And so I think it's too dense and too difficult to talk about games and their total possible complexity, and that we need to ask ourselves, what are the moves that any person can make it only at any one point in the game? And Go, it's over 100. In checkers, it's like over 20, maybe something like that. In Pokemon, it's just 9. And so when we're talking about games and complexity, we're trying to figure out, is the player thinking when they make choices? Is the player devising strategies? Is the player being tactical? Is he using a wide plethora of options at a given moment in time? And isn't that making the game fun by letting the player have all of these options? Because Dragon Age Origins is a tactical and strategic game, and because Dragon Age 2 is a sequel to it, we would imagine that BioWare would like it to also be tactical and strategic. I don't know how true that is, but I think that's the case. And I also think that BioWare wants the game to be simple and easy to pick up, because the larger barrier of entry a game has, the less money it makes. And BioWare is making a AAA game, so it has to have a AAA appeal to get the money back. So I can understand that BioWare wants a simple game. But in the same breath, you want to make a complex game, because if the game is simple, it's trivial. The answer is obvious. It solves itself. And Dragon Age 2 solves itself, and that's why it isn't an interesting game. And that's why a lot of other games, like for instance KOTOR and KOTOR 2, don't have the most complex combat. Gasp, I know. They're very shallow and linear. And the only reason I have enjoyed KOTOR 1 and 2 is mostly because of the story and the characters and the interactions there. I mean, so BioWare could succeed and make a good game without listening to any of the things I'm about to talk about. But I think BioWare wants to appeal to as large an audience as possible, and I think that role-playing games have a very wide appeal. No one plays Pokemon because of the story. Everyone plays Pokemon because of the gameplay, and children as young as 4 and 5 can pick up Pokemon without understanding anything about the game systems, and they can play it, and they can have fun. And some people as old as me occasionally still play Pokemon because it has that complexity, because it has that wider appeal, and because it's complex and because it's also simple, it's perfect. I mean, it's not a perfect product. I think Nintendo could do a lot better with Pokemon. It hasn't changed that much over the years, and it's sort of become imbalanced and stagnated. But BioWare need not look far to find games that have wide appeal and are still good games in and of themselves. I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? I haven't even put out any numbers here to try and further prove my point here. I'm just sort of rambling on, and I just can't help myself because I'm so confounded and confused, and I think it's because BioWare is believing something that I know to be completely and ridiculously not true, and that they believe in the myth. The myth, you know the myth, right? The myth that role-playing games aren't fun, that role-playing game mechanics are boring, that role-playing game mechanics are grindy and stupid and shallow. They believe in that myth. The myth that, I don't know who created this myth, this mystical thing. Was it World of Warcraft? Was it some really bad JRPG? So, again, someone got the impression that role-playing games are boring and that the systems in them are boring and they don't have wide appeal. But Pokemon is the exact it's just perfect. It just shows you that that's completely untrue, that Pokemon is a slow, turn-based role-playing game, and people buy it every year, even if it's a rehash. Even if Black and White 2 was just a giant cash-in, tons of people bought it. So it's not like there isn't any appeal from these games. It's not like this is something that only basement dwellers like. This is ridiculous. And it seems like to me BioWare has given up on the role-playing game mechanics. I think that after seeing The Walking Dead sell as many copies and get as much praise as it has, that Dragon Age 3 can be an adventure game, and they'll do fine. And I think they believe that traditional turn-based role-playing game mechanics are inferior. I think that's a juvenile, silly opinion. It's not nostalgia that makes these games fun. People who always say that confuse the hell out of me. But I think BioWare is believing in this myth, and they've given up on role-playing game mechanics. And I don't know what to say to that. I can only, from this point on, for the short little bit I'm going to talk about it, is just throw down some numbers, say it's fun, it's not hard to make a game around these things, and here you go. Here's the formula. Let's go. In order for a role-playing game to work, you need to offer players choice. And one way to ensure that there is always a choice for the player is to use a structure like this. This is a tree-like structure where all you're doing is you're giving value and assigning specific traits to each node on this giant tree. And this ensures that choices matter because you're picking between two or three or four things at once. But not only that, it's making sure that the amount of choice you have is constrained. You can't choose 1,000 nodes. You can only choose 4 or 10. You know, and this kind of structure is easy to program. It's easy for the human brain to understand, and it offers controllable complexity that grows as the game moves forward. Trees ensure that we have a game. I know that some game designers think that games magically just come from their brains, but this kind of a structure ensures that we have design that works. And of course, there's a caveat to this kind of structure, and that I'm sure that you're all vaguely familiar with World of Warcraft, or, you know, I can show any skill tree from Borderlands or some really shallow role-playing game that has systems that I don't think are that interesting. And the reason for that is that when you create this tree, you have to make sure that all the nodes matter, that all the nodes really change how you play your character, and that, yes, if you're going to have nodes that only increase your fire resistance or your attack speed by a small percentage every time you take that node, then you need to make sure that players are taking 100 nodes through the course of their journey. Those nodes have to add up to mean something. Otherwise, it's just meaningless. You know, Star Wars: The Old Republic, I played it for from 1 to 15 as the free-to-play a couple weeks ago, and there were nodes that increased something by 3%. It's completely pointless and stupid, and that's why I can understand why Blizzard in the latest expansion removed their passive tree from the game, because, you know, none of your choices mattered. Well, make the choices matter, but make sure there's also a structure to these choices. You know, that's number one. And sure, there are other ways to make role-playing game systems. This is just one way I'm pointing out, but I think it's a very structured way where you can't mess up, okay? And I think there's another structure we can talk about. It's called the finite state machine, or the finite state automaton. In this example here, you start at the start node called Q0, and you go to Q1 by taking a 0, or you could go to Q2 by taking a 1. And so although Q1 and Q2 are not accepting states, so you don't really have anything yet. So from Q2, you can take a 0, and you can go back to Q0, which is an accepting state, and you can say, oh, Q0 is an accepting state, and to get there we took 1, and then we took 0. Okay, so now in the language is 1, 0. And another example would be 0 goes to Q1, and then Q1 with a 1 goes back to Q0. So 0, 1 and 1, 0 are in the language. And any other permutation isn't in the language because it goes to the junk node Q3. Well, once you get to Q3, you're stuck there. But if you can stay on Q1 and Q2 and go back to Q0, you're in the language. And so this kind of a design can be applied to games because we're creating an explicit language here. And you're never going to accept something that isn't in a language. And this kind of design ensures that not only can humans design this sort of thing, but computers can automatically generate these kinds of things. And we can use these systems to not only create ways for us to specialize our character, but for us to play the game. So if I'm in, let's say, a situation we'll call 1, well, I can take action A or C, and I can get to situation 2. And maybe I can take A and C again and get to situation 3. But if I take A and C a fourth time, I'm going to be stuck in situation 3. So I have to go back and do action B, then I got to take action B to 4. Well, the goal node is action 1. When we get back to action 1, I got to do action A. And so we've got this explicit language of how to get to the solve node of the game. And if we design games around these sorts of structures, then we have a game because we're ensuring that there are actions players can take, that there are a finite number of actions that we've created for this game, and that when a player takes an action, it has a measurable result. And, you know, this is perfect because we can even design smart AI around these systems because the AI can understand these kinds of graphs. Systems like these can grow to be extraordinarily complex and give us many ways to play the game. But not only that, they let us control the complexity and have a wrangle over it. And so we have the best of both worlds. We have a complex game, and we have a game that we can make in a year. or if we're going an extra mile, we're going to spend 2 or 3 years to make a game, we're going to make sure that we didn't waste all that money and man hours making a boring game. We're going to make sure that we have a game that has substance to it. And do I need to convince you that these kinds of games could be complex? I shouldn't have to. Baldur's Gate 2 had the fighter, the ranger, the paladin, the barbarian, the cleric, the druid, the mage, the sorcerer, the thief, the bard. It had the humans, the elf, the half-elves, the halflings, the dwarfs, the half-orcs. They had everything. They had all these combinations that grew immensely. I did some basic calculations, and there's easily over 4,000 different kinds of starting protagonists for Baldur's Gate 2. And that's not even including the number of spells that you can take as a mage or the number of other feats you can take at the beginning of the game. That's just purely from your alignment, your class, your character, your race, your kit. All of those things matter, and these games worked, and they're so complex, and I don't understand why we only have 3 classes in Dragon Age 2, but maybe we can still work with a system like that. I can understand, but we need to make these systems more complex, or at least they need to be more complex for the people who want them to be complex. Pokemon is a game that's simple, but at the same time it can be very, very complex and can be played, there are people who play it at least semi-competitively. You have 6 Pokemon out of 649, and each of those Pokemon knows 4 moves, but he could at least know from a move pool of at least 8 to 10. But some Pokemon have even 20 moves in the move pool. But Ditto and Wobbuffet, they have a little bit lower than that, but not really. Ditto can know every move in the game. And every Pokemon has at least 2 passive abilities in the game. Some have 3 now, and every Pokemon has 6 stats that can be specialized in, though most people only focus on 2 at the same time. But even so, a Pokemon like Drapion could be a tank or a fast sweeper, or even a special attacker type, depending on if he's trained in special, defense, and HP, or HP and defense, or attack and speed. And so basically, the formula would be 649 choose 6, times 8 choose 4, times 6 choose 2, times 2 choose 1, and that gets you 2.1295551 e to the 17, and that's the number of possible party combinations, e to the 17, which is a pretty low amount if we compare it to Go. Go is about e to the 152 times more complex than Pokemon. So Pokemon, comparatively, is significantly more simpler than a very complex game like Go, but it's got so much choice and availability to us, and there's no reason why we can't have games as complex as Pokemon. And sure, I'm doing this completely wrong because Path of Exile skill tree is not where you pick 116 nodes out of 1350, but even so, we can sort of give some vague estimation of how complex Path of Exile is by saying 1315 choose 116. That gets you 2.39000174 e to the 170. That's almost as complex as Go. We have so many possible combinations of skills, and sure, not all of them are meaningful, or not all of them are any good, but there are at least a handful in there that are viable, and there's at least 1,000 builds that are viable in Path of Exile right now. We could have. Why does Dragon Age 2 only have 2, maybe 3 viable builds per class? We can do better than this. This is ridiculous. Path of Exile is a point-and-click, clicky-to-death thing game. It's a game. It's just Diablo 2 where you find 100 million items and you pick one of them and that's it. But it's so much fun. Why can't more role-playing games commit to design? It can be fun. You can even, okay, so I don't have much time because I swore I wouldn't make this video over an hour and a half, but I'm already there, so I gotta finish up real quick. Okay, so the last thing I really want to talk about is level design, because level design is so important in role-playing games, and it seems that BioWare has no idea what to do. And yes, there are some great role-playing games that have tiny, tiny rooms, so you can fit it on an Xbox 360. If the next Dragon Age has to play on an Xbox 360, it's fine. You can still make good role-playing games with tiny, tiny rooms. Okay, so here's what you do. You take all the things I just showed in the last 5 minutes, and you apply it to level design. It's exactly the same thing. Levels, you just think of them as nodes. You just put the nodes and you attach the nodes, and as long as the nodes are connected to other nodes, as long as there's 2 things entering a node and 2 things leaving a node, then you have a level design. You can have this. Dragon Age 2 could have had randomly designed levels the computer made. You didn't have to copy and paste the same cave 10, 11, 15 times. You could have had it generated and use assets. It wouldn't have looked dumb. Plenty of budget RPGs do this, and if you're going to make a game in less than a year, you're going to have to accept that randomly generated things are fine, and it's easier to immerse yourself in a randomly generated cave than it is to immerse yourself in the same cave walking around it backwards and forwards 8, 9 times. And I'm not saying that you have to make the game just like Deus Ex. All you have to do is just make sure there's at least 2 ways to solve a thing, and you have a game. If I'm not walking down a corridor the whole game, it's a game. I'll accept it. Okay, my standards are low now. There aren't many games left. There aren't many role-playing games left. But if you just follow this basic finite state machine business, computer guys understand it. Just go talk to one of your programmers, and he'll explain it all to you, and it'll make perfect sense because it's a budget way to make it interesting, and it's a budget way to make it simple and complex, and it works for all these other games just fine. It's not arcane magic things. thank you for enduring this entire video. You know, making this video, I'm just sort of thought about all these things, and I'm convinced of it now that you can have some of your cake and you can eat some of your cake too. Now, maybe you can't have both at the same time. Maybe you can't have all of the things that you want, but you can reach a compromise and a balance, BioWare. You can give us complexity and simplicity. You can give us the things you want to give us and the things that you need to give us. It's just finding that balance. It's just understanding that you don't have to mutually exclude people just because you want to expand your audience. And trying to is just going to destroy the audience that has followed you. In fact, it's already destroyed you. You're going to have to do a lot to make Dragon Age 3 work. So why don't you listen to me? Just try something. Just anything. And one last quip. If you actually want fan input about Mass Effect 4 and Dragon Age 3, don't do what you've been doing. I know what you've been doing. You've been saying, tweet us if you have something you want to say. No, Twitter has 140 characters. Now, I consider myself to be an okay linguist, maybe a pretty good one on a good day, but I can't constrain what I need to tell you in 140 characters. Even if I wrote it in Japanese, I couldn't constrain it all. It's too much to talk about. There's so many things wrong, you can't. That's just like insulting us, that we could tell you how to fix your game in 140 characters. That's an insult. It's not that trivial. You know it's not hard to make. It's not easy making a game. So just, I know. Listen, I know. The BioWare forums are filled with people. And I understand a lot of this conflict has resulted from a total lack of communication. And you guys are you have Stanley Wu and the end of line stuff. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to talk to these people. And I understand it's a large, fractured community. You have Cullen crazies. You have the rabid children who just started playing video games, and you have the romance people, and you got people like me, and you got Volorn. You got all these people, all these nut crazy-zos, but you got to figure out a way to talk to us. And I know maybe you shouldn't talk to everyone because maybe you can't say productive, constructive things to everybody, but you got to come forward. And I'm not saying, I try to make this video as constructive as I can. I know that there's a point when criticism is just simply destructive and not helpful, but you have to talk to us. You have to communicate. You have to open the lines of communication. All the good developers I know, or were good developers, when they let us talk to them. Communication is probably the most important thing you need to improve upon besides your game design. Sorry I lied. I'm sorry. This is not the end. The real end, the most important part of this video, is the part I'm going to talk to you about for hopefully not very long. And that, it's a secret. It's a secret. Okay, it must be some kind of secret, because it can't be something that only I know. It's just that I don't know. Maybe there are people who talk about it, but I don't know these people, and I don't hear about them in the mainstream. So maybe no one knows. Maybe it's just me. And well, it's obvious, right? You know, if you live in Western culture, then you know what I know, and that you know that role-playing games are a taboo. I mean, they're kind of a taboo. I mean, in spite of the fact that nerd culture, as of late, has sort of been commodified, and there's sort of this loose understanding that some people want to be associated, and they have a positive idea of what being a nerd is. When I grew up, there was no such connotations. Being a nerd or a geek was generally something where you did something that you liked, and people didn't like that you liked that thing. And so they would generally, cause social harm to you in some way. And I guess no, it hasn't changed, has it? Because, I mean, still, when you watch something, it's not any different in today's media. If someone plays Dungeons and Dragons on a television show, it's usually followed by a series of laugh tracks, because the audience can't sympathize or understand why someone like that might enjoy something like that. It's something that they ridicule. And so even though being a nerd or a geek might be more socially acceptable these days, role-playing games aren't. And that's a fault that reflects on BioWare, because BioWare is the largest digital role-playing company I know of. I mean, I wish Obsidian or CD Projekt or some other company were the largest one, but it's BioWare. So when BioWare decides to make Mass Effect into a third-person shooter, to conform to society's ideas that role-playing games are boring and lame and stupid, we have a problem, because BioWare should be defending people who like role-playing games. They shouldn't be conforming to the idea that role-playing games are boring, the myth that role-playing games aren't fun, that they're weird. You know, the fact that BioWare doesn't try to defend its own medium is its own undoing. They would be selling more copies if they fought to make a role-playing game more socially interesting. When a 16-year-old boy is choosing between Call of Duty and Call of Duty in space, I mean, there isn't any real choice there. But they could have made Mass Effect, you know, a true role-playing game, and they could have tried to make it appeal. They could have tried to, you know, market the game and to try to positively spread the idea that role-playing games are good. But see, when you release a game like Dragon Age 2, you negatively impact everyone because you make role-playing games have a bad name. I mean, the only mainstream role-playing game there is World of Warcraft, and that certainly doesn't really show the fun things about role-playing games. In fact, it just gives a negative idea about grinding and, you know, socially awkward people. So, you know, BioWare is really doing a disservice to everybody when they make Mass Effect 3 into a cover-based third-person shooter. The genre is a fine genre. The genre doesn't have to change. It doesn't have to become another genre to have mass appeal.